My name is Alice. I go to UTA, UT Arlington. I should maybe specify, and I'm really into music. So maybe I'm excited to talk about music as it pertains to Gen Z and Millennials or whatever we are.
I'm Abby. I am interested in a lot of things. I'm currently studying chemistry and psychology at the University of Georgia.
My name is Sofia. I am also a student at the University of Georgia, and I am super interested in longboarding and photography.
My name is Michael. I'm also very interested in music, especially hip hop. I am very into left-wing activism, and I'm studying political science at my local community college right now.
Hi, I'm Colin. I go to Harvard University. I study government, and I'm happy to talk about pretty much anything relating to Gen Z.
All right, so here's the big question. Are you guys millennials?
First of all, how dare you say that, but no. I've had this discussion with Alice actually several times about this, where this is sort of weird middle ground between Gen Z and Millennial that we fall in, where I'd say we have quite a bit in common with Millennials, and we have quite a bit not in common with Gen Z, but we don't really share the same experiences as Millennials. I'd say we are Gen Z, obviously, but we're kind of this weird subset that's like the awkward kid that doesn't really fit into either, because we're more depressed than Gen Z, but we're more optimistic than Millennials, and that can be a good thing, you know?
Strauss and Howe, the guys who coined the name Millennial, date that generation from 1982 to 2004. Pew Research dates it from 1981 to 1996. What do you guys think about those dates?
Well, when I look at like how people of our generation, the early part of Gen Z, are acting, I think it fits more in line with the hero archetype, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think you see just recently, the last few days, a lot of kids our age are getting involved in very serious activism and going out in the streets and protesting, which is something, and getting involved in that kind of action, which is something more associated with like hero generation, a hero generation. So and more associated with what the millennial generation was supposed to be, and to a certain extent was. But yeah,
we definitely.
That kind of makes me lean more towards that. We still might be part of the millennial generation.
What year were you born?
2001.
2001. So yeah that's we're like millennials. It's funny you say that, like how we were supposed to be civically, because, and this is not going to be about millennials. This is going to be about Gen Z. But yeah, it's funny. It's good. It's interesting that you say that, because I feel like while we had this spirit, or still have the spirit of activism and wanting to protest, society didn't always nurture that. We weren't always in a position to we didn't always have issues to protest. It wasn't like there was a crisis issue. If we're going to use Strauss and Howe language, we didn't always have a lot of crisis issues to protest, in my opinion. What do you think about that, Darius?
Yeah, I'd be curious to know, so would you say then that the back half of the millennial generation, so I'm 1994, would you say the later half of the millennial generation is more in line with, that description of the hero archetype from Strauss and Howe, which is, the civically minded, citizen? And what would you say, I guess, as far as, do you think the earlier half of the millennials come across as less civic?
Yeah, that is how it sort of comes off to me. Although I don't necessarily agree that earlier millennials didn't have crisis to react to. When you look at something like the 2008 crash, that was very much a crisis. You're right. I think those in power kind of prolonged it from totally crashing, like it did in the late 20s, early 30s and stuff. So, yeah.
Don't want to get too caught up in Strauss and Howe, but I'm glad you said prolonged. because I think part of the crisis is the fact that they tried to keep the 3T culture, the unraveling culture. Basically, for those who don't know Strauss and Howe, they tried to keep the 90s, the 80s, and the 90s alive longer than it probably should have been. I think that created the crisis, the decadence, the materialism, the same way of the neoliberalism, which is still here. What do you guys socially and culturally care about?
I think that first and foremost, like the biggest fear that I have is about climate change, just because of the like the fact that I know that that's an existential threat to like the entire human race. And I think that, you know, we talk about all of these other like very clear systematic problems in our world and in society, and those are all important too. But I think that very few quite reach that same gravity. That being said, the entire agenda that progressive politics kind of has, whether it's with the economic injustice or social injustice or climate change or whatever, are things that I'm, you know, definitely very concerned about. And I kind of approach that from a very, I guess, political, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like actual political organizing with campaigns kind of standpoint. I volunteered, like I went block walking for Better Work, because I'm here in Texas back in 2018. And I did again for Bernie Sanders early in this primary, and then that didn't exactly pan out. I guess neither of those did. But, you know, I mean, I think that things here are kind of moving in that direction. I fear that it'll get to a point when it's too late. And, you know, I know that that at that point, maybe the like traditional route of activism might not be what a lot of people have in mind. I hear that sentiment a lot, I should say.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I think it was John F. Kennedy that said that if people can't reform peacefully, then they will do so violently.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very much true. I think that's very relevant in the last couple of days here as well.
Well, what is activism? Like, for instance, civil rights movement, the silent generation and the boomers, you know, did the typical peaceful protest and marching. How does activism look for Gen Z? What makes you guys, is it always through, you know, actually physically being and engaging on the street level?
The idea of what activism equals in the kind of Gen Z era is inexorably connected to social media. It's not just that social media has, for whatever reason, become a primary method of activism. It's that it's actually opened up entirely new avenues for participation and for engagement that just wouldn't have existed a few years ago, or even say like any time prior to the Bernie campaign. I think 2016 and 2015 were a big kind of barrier breaker there, in that suddenly you had these campaigns, both you could argue Bernie Sanders, obviously, but also to an element kind of Trump sort of movement, which like made possible political activism, political engagement almost entirely based off of online. And while they probably didn't decide the election, they were still pretty impactful. Since then, there's been this huge explosion of social groups, both, I mean, obviously some conventional social groups, but the big boom has been among groups which normally are kind of left out of mainstream politics, which have been able to basically organize and achieve a strength in numbers through remoteness that they were not able to achieve otherwise. I think this is really notable, actually, because what it has done is create this kind of strange uncertainty in which I can't really be certain whether or not it's that this generation is extremely political and would have in any other situation become like a new student protest generation or like, or if the barrier to action has been so lowered that it allows everyone to, in a sense, be political. Like,
that's a good point.
Yeah. Politics in today, I mean, I'll put it this way. I know plenty of people who are utterly cynical and apolitical and could not care in the slightest. But for every one of those, I can look at some rallying cause online and see 100,000 people who are
Mm-hmm.
So the question is Gen Z is actually more political generation inspired to protest and work out? Or is it that mechanisms have created an entirely new aspect of what it means to be political?
So if you guys, like, obviously through social media and now, like, it is more engaging, but do you guys think that that means it's more effective, our activism?
No.
Yeah,
I don't.
What are you thinking, Abby? What are you thinking, Abby? I see.
Oh, I don't think it's necessarily more effective. I just think it's so much easier to get messages out that more people end up caring, just because it's like you sign a petition, but petitions don't mean a lot to people who are in power, so it's like ridiculous. It's just to get it on people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have dramatically expanded the ability to get signaling out there, i.e. the ability to spread messages, proliferate information, and to allow people to engage with it in a manner that doesn't it basically makes it possible for people who wouldn't theoretically go out in the streets to kind of be mini activists themselves. That being said, I don't necessarily think that much of that has made much of a difference. I mean, I'm sure everyone here has heard the refrain, like, social media isn't real life or whatever, but it's worth noting that the actual impact of this sort of stuff is, while it has, I think, been able to work around a few key issues, it's by and large not achieved the sort of political outcomes that actual boots on the ground protesting can. You could argue that that isn't the point. It's more about creating and signaling these political divides, like, i.e. it's a tool, it's not a replacement. But by and large, I'd say it's a lot easier for me to go on to, say, Facebook or something and like a bunch of messages and sign a petition than it is for me to go out and do something, but it's not going to actually do anything.
Mike? I can speak to that as someone who's involved in activism in a really big way. That we try to use social media as a tool, but are frustrated when a lot of the times it tends to stay on social media.
Right.
And doesn't result in real life. We think we're going to get a bigger turnout to a certain event because a bunch of people sign up saying they're going to go, and then a lot of times less. So then, and sometimes it's more, but a lot of times it's less than what the people are say they're going to show up. But I do think overall that social media has been effective in bringing together people who would not otherwise be connected. I know, for instance, of a online group that fundraises money for candidates who are similar to the style of, like, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or at a larger level Bernie Sanders, called Justice Democrats. And there's another group called Brand New Congress. And that's all pretty much done on social media, and they have a really big presence that way. And they use their social media presence to get known and get donations from all across the country, from, like, people who are just given a few bucks. And that has been pretty effective in getting, like, lower level seats of like pretty progressive candidates through across the country, whether that be in, like, there's like I think her name is Kara Eastman, who's like in Nebraska, who looks like she may win a district there, to, like I previously said, like the AOC and like a more progressive area like New York can win. So I think it might be bringing together young people and progressive people in both previously thought to be red areas, Republican areas, and blue areas. Especially, I mean, I think it was Alice who was talking about how they campaign for Beto O'Rourke, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would have been previously thought to be unthinkable for a Democrat to even be close to winning in Texas. For a long time, at least, that's been the case. And I think a large part of that was, like, online presence. I can tell you, I live in California, and I saw a bunch of Beto O'Rourke signs out over here. And there were a bunch of people from California saying, "Oh, did you donate to Beto O'Rourke?" So
yeah, see, I mean, you say that, and then I remember, like, conservatives here in Texas that I know that were saying that, well, he's more popular in California than he is in Texas.
I bet he was.
So,
But I do think that there was a camaraderie, at least, because I made a lot of phone calls out to Texas, and there was a lot of progressive people who were super stoked and super happy to, get involved. So I don't know. It kind of erased my, like, in California, there's a lot of preconceived notions, right, about like Texas or the South or whatever. And I think that, like, with like social media, I think a lot of people in this area are starting to realize that no, we're very much like in the same boat. So yeah.
Right. So, I mean, speaking of the tools you guys use, and I'd be interested to see what Abby and Sophia think of this. Do you see a difference between, say, Democrats and Republicans in your generation as opposed to, the older generations, like with baby boomers, for example? A lot of them are looked at as, on the Democratic side, they'd be, third way Clinton Democrats. And then on the Republican side, they would be considered, I guess, that sort of Newt Gingrich era Republican. Like, do you guys see differences?
You're talking on the social media platform?
Well,
In general, but yeah, also on social media.
It's tough to say, I guess, on social media, but for me at least, I feel like maybe now people that I talk to that are closer to my age are more willing to sit there and listen and have a discussion with you, whereas some of the older generations might be so
outraged,
just convinced of their of their beliefs that it's a little tougher, and I end up being the one that gets frustrated and just say, okay, they're not gonna change. But I do feel like I can have a conversation with people that are closer to my age.
Gen Z is usually positioned as being more left than millennials, and we were supposed to be like the most leftist generation. So that just leaves me wondering, like, okay, so is that true, or do you guys have Republicans and they just look differently? Like, how are Republicans?
I think that, like, both extremes have been cultivated a bit more. In the left-wing communities that I'm around in, there are a lot more people than I ever expected that there would be who are, like, not just, like, social or democratic socialist or social democrats. They're, like, real leftists, like talking about, like, we need to seize the means of production, all this kind of stuff. So there are, like, a lot of Gen Z kids who are really like that, more so than I believe millennials are like that. I also noticed, though, that there's possibly more of an alt-right following with Gen Z than there was with millennials, and I've noticed that online. Gen Z, I think more so than millennials, tends to be really frustrated with, like, I'm not going to say the alt-right just hates identity politics in general, or at least left-wing identity politics. But I think the Gen Z in general is kind of sick of, like, cynical identity politics. The idea of, like, oh, we have a insert minority here, a CEO, but at the same time they're still part of the same system that's oppressing people. So we're like, okay, and what so what, So I think that's kind of a bigger thing going on in Gen Z than in the millennial generation. And I think that's also fostered some sort of, maybe not more alt-right people, but, like, more extreme, maybe more intense alt-right people.
I've definitely seen lots of, like, alt-right stuff online, but I've never actually met someone in real life who's, like, thinks like that or talk like that. I've met Republicans, but not to that extent. Most of the Republicans I know my age are still really, like, socially liberal.
Right.
I think that the alt-right stuff, I think it's similar to how political messages are, like, they're blown up, like, you see them and they perpetuate everywhere. I think alt-right messages also, like, perpetuate a little bit like that. So I think that it's easier to see it online than actually in person.
So you would say, like, that Gen Z, and honestly this goes for millennials too, Republicans, or those who lean right, are more for double standards when it comes to identity issues, and but not necessarily cultural war issues like, you know, a stance on gay marriage or abortion that maybe Xers and Boomers usually
So
fight
what
over.
So what I've noticed is that there are people who I'll talk to them and they're like, I just don't like identity politics, and they start like that when you first talk to them in person.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, but you know, I'm not crazy or anything.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, you're talking to them and they add you to a group chat and they're like making Holocaust memes and like, you know, yeah, and you know, saying horribly racist things and you know, like I'm just like, oh God, what happened here?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think a lot of times they present themselves in person as more moderate or because it's not exactly, you know, good for their movement and what they're trying to do to immediately come off as crazy alt-right people.
Mm-hmm.
So and they don't really show their true colors until they're behind a screen and you can't really see who they are.
I still think that the fact that they present themselves like that shows that, like, in general, our like the younger society leans a lot more left.
Now,
Yeah.
Just to kind of add something here, right? Actually, two things, right? I think firstly, it's worth noting that I think unlike pretty much any other movement, especially in contrast to the more kind of fringe left and whatever, right? The what's the word? The alt-right essentially has a uniquely kind of weirdly self-aware idea about optics, right? A lot of these people have this sort of emphasis of basically stuff like, what do they call it, like hiding your power level and or some sort of equivalent thing, or good optics or whatever. Basically, you say the things that you feel people can empathize with you at. Whereas on the other hand, you hide the things that you know they won't. So it's a process of kind of drawing it in, essentially. Now, it's worth noting also that the alt-right, though it's often presented as a monolith, is really kind of split among these two different groups. There was this big kind of, like, I guess you call it like movement unrest about 2 or 3 years ago, essentially, that's kind of crystallized into this weird sort of variant of the group, in which you basically have two different types. You've got these more kind of traditional libertarian types who oftentimes are fairly right-wing on like economic issues, right-wing on stuff, but they generally don't care that much about like gay marriage or any sort of other sort of social issues, just kind of a, you know, I don't like SJWs, but you know, you can do what you want sort of person, right? And then there's the more insidious type, which really got a boost in the last year or two, I'd say, which is basically people who are economically kind of mixed, almost sometimes even leftist, but socially extremely conservative. And that's kind of been the big push right now. Basically, people who like to LARP as like traditional Catholics or something, right? And or like from the mid 1800s. And that's kind of been like the weird chic thing to do. You know, folks who think that like sex before marriage is wrong and gay marriage is bad and stuff like that. Just all these kind of like bizarre kind of LARPy beliefs. And just to be clear, LARP means live action role play. It means pretending to be someone you're. It's in this term, it means pretending to be something you're not. But this kind of weird variance between the two of them essentially is ultimately actually kind of substantial, because one group is more likely just be kind of people watched a bunch of anti-SJW cringe compilations. And the other one can really range and produce some, shall we say, some interesting characters.
And what's really scary to what Colin was talking about is there is that split between the more libertarian right with Gen Z, which I think most Gen Z Republicans are more libertarian. I think that is true. I think they like the small government kind of stuff, but they're cool with, like, you know, gay marriage, abortion rights, or what, all those sorts of things. But what's kind of a scary slippery slope to me is that a lot of these libertarians, I'll call them, will start saying things like, well, businesses should have the right to not allow certain people you know, into their business, and kind of making some pre-civil rights era arguments like that. That I think there's a pipeline, I'll put it that way, where there are some people who I think are truly alt-right who are trying to blend in with the more libertarian, I'll say again, libertarian in quotes like that, group of Republicans, and, you know, to bring them over to the more alt-right side of things. I see it all the time.
I've met a lot of conservatives that claim to be libertarians, and, you know, they say that they have nothing against gay marriage, nothing against this and that, and the mindset that I've come to realize that a lot of these people have is that they have nothing against gay people as long as they don't have to see them, right? Or, you know, and just go down the list with any sort of social issue. They claim to be libertarians because libertarian sounds more, I guess, like reasonable or something. I think definitely for people in Gen Z, the word libertarian sounds a lot more reasonable than conservative or Republican even. So, you know, I think people just kind of like default to saying that's what they are, when it isn't really, and I'm not sure if it's a word that even has like any solid meaning anymore sometimes.
Something that's really notable and important to note is that Gen Z really only came into its own politically in the last 4 years or so, right? Prior to the Bernie Sanders campaign and the advent of the kind of online politics, Gen Z was largely apathetic. Now, part of that was because we were all like at the oldest, like just graduated high school or whatever, right? But another alternative to that is also, I think that as far as things go, Gen Z's big rush of like, you know, ideological optimism kind of already happened. Like, you'll note that following the Bernie campaign not getting it in 2016, then there was a huge surge in political engagement, political activism, and part of that was also probably spurred by President Trump getting elected, of course. But those two things kind of fueled both the idea that there was like a movement to fight for, you know, a movement in which you could work, and there was a clear, at least to some people would perceive it, a clear villain or whatever, right, to work against.
Right.
Now, I think that something that has really changed that is Bernie basically not getting the nomination this time. I think there's some articles across the place about kind of progressive spaces being in disarray, not really knowing what to do with this, and I think some of that's just clickbait, some might be true though, but I think in general, the trend I've seen among my peers is that they've become a lot more cynical in the last year. Like, a lot of people who are very optimistically progressive have either kind of just either gotten pushed more kind of you know, whatever works, it's just kind of containment at this point, or on the alternative, people who get pushed into like a much more kind of radical politics because they see the existing situation not working. I think Gen Z had its big electoral moment, and at least for the moment, I could see Gen Z becoming as kind of cynical and disillusioned as the people above them, though it's really going to depend on what the next 4 years look like.
I think, yeah, I agree with that. I think I often find myself becoming more and more discouraged, just given things that have been happening recently. And it's frustrating, and I don't like it, and I would like to, you know, change it or know what to do. But I think that might be like a difference between maybe like my generation now, is that we do see this kind of, or we do experience a little bit of like this cynical, I don't know, I guess like idea, and then we don't know what to do with it. Like how would you feel, I guess, Ryan, in terms of, I guess, the people around you and that feeling of like being cynical?
Our Trump moment, it's like, was probably 2000 when the whole Bush election debacle. So if you consider 81 the first year of Millennial, that means that 2000 was our first time to vote. And so, like a lot of Gen Zers, we politically speaking, it's been kind of crazy for us, our whole, you know, career. But then after that, we had Obama. We had a victory. So I think, I don't know if Obama created a false victory that kind of re-energized us, and so around like the right time for us to, you know, finally become a little bit older, and I don't know if we gained a reboot from that.
I'm born in '94, so my year was the first one to vote for Barack Obama. So even though I wasn't there for 2008, I was there for 2012. And a question I have for all of you is, one, off of what Sofia said, do you feel cynical? And then question two would be the victories that I guess the millennials had, because I mean, I don't know if you guys remember Barack Obama being elected, but I pointed out to him that in my experience, you guys don't consider our victories to be, I guess, your victories. So what do you feel, where do you guys feel that you've had any victories, I guess, in society in general?
Well, when I first of all, to remember like what it was like seeing Obama get elected when I was a kid, I just remember everyone being around me being just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like we just solved everything, you know, like there was this there was this really strong sense of optimism. I remember there being, and that was kind of, you know, I got into politics because of, you know, all people in my family around me were super in it for Obama and all that. So I remember seeing all that and being really inspired by that. As I got older, I came to realize that Obama wasn't perfect, and that the Democrats in general were not, you know, really always on the side of the working class, and or on people or for minorities all the time as well, even though they'd like people to think that. I mean, just look at Amy Klobuchar going on in Minnesota right now. She had the ability to prosecute this guy who ended up killing an unarmed person, you know. She had the ability to prosecute him years ago for other things, and she didn't. And she's a Democrat, right? So as I got older, I started realizing patterns like that. And when we find, and for me, and I think, I don't know if everyone else agrees with me, when we got someone like Bernie Sanders, we were like, oh my God, we got we got him, you know? And even though he hasn't won either time, I think that we still feel it's a really big victory that we got a lot of his ideas closer to being mainstream. And I also think down ballot elections, we've made some huge progress and huge wins. When I first heard about Justice Democrats, a brand new Congress getting started and running candidates like AOC, I was super excited and was making calls for them when there was there was a few hundred people doing that. And when AOC won and beat one of the most powerful Democrats in the House, I don't know about other Gen Z people or who are called Gen Z people, but I was like, that's a victory. And you know, I teared up because of that. I do. So I'm not as cynical. I don't, and a lot of people around me aren't as cynical. I think we are definitely sad and even depressed about what's happened with Sanders. But I hear a lot of people talking around me like, okay, let's just get Joe Biden in, and once he's in there, let's push him as far as we can to the left. I hear a lot of arguments about, you know, that's what happened with FDR. He wasn't elected as a crazy, you know, far to the left guy. He was a centrist guy, but a bunch of unions and far left organizations were like, hey, we want to do this, so at least give us this. So I think that I still think there's a lot of optimism and a lot of fervor.
If Joe Biden, I think that that's the outlook that I have personally. You know, I'm hoping that he wins, and hoping, like you said, that we can push him as far to the left as we can. And I'm also optimistic because I've seen him adopt certain things on his platform, like just within the last month, that are, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's more of a step in the right direction than I was expecting.
Better than it would have been.
Yeah. That said, I don't know if that mindset, and it might be a difference of California and Texas, because I don't think that that's the mindset of people here. I think a lot of people that I know are either completely apolitical and they've just checked out, and like I will be dragging them to the polls in November if I'm actually on campus, which who knows with this virus. And so it's either that or they're extremely cynical. And you know, I think that they were cynical before Sanders lost as well. You know, maybe people more saw that as like a last chance. And I think that for people that are in that mindset, which, and that definitely makes up a sizable chunk, it doesn't matter what Joe Biden does. Joe Biden could implement every policy of Bernie Sanders, which he won't. But hypothetically, if he did, and that's still not going to be considered a victory for some people. And I kind of get that because, like, it's not just about the, like, what actually happens, but also the message that is sent. I guess electing a supposed, you know, centrist, neoliberal, so on and so forth. I get how it can be disheartening, even though I disagree, basically.
Especially because of like the allegations against him and his troubled history with race relations as well. It's not maybe the best message to be sending to our generation to propaganda.
Yeah, I've seen lots of cynicism in response to it. I don't know what the difference is between who we're seeing and what. I don't see lots of necessarily politics on my feeds, but a lot of people were like, okay, Biden is our Democratic candidate. Last time Hillary was our Democratic candidate. Like, we're being crushed by the system, essentially, to just vote for whoever they want. And I've seen, like, obviously there are issues with the phrase vote blue no matter who, but it means, you know, work with what we have. And I've seen such a violent reaction to that online, like that phrase, and the idea of voting for Biden at all because of what he's got. People are saying they're going to write in Bernie, and I feel like that's, I don't know, I feel like it's a lot of cynicism and not really working with the system, but not working in a way that you could actually go against the system.
Michael, when you mentioned like Obama, how in 2008 there was like this big joy and everything like that. Basically, I'm reading that we put a lot of emphasis on him as a person. Meanwhile, policies didn't change. The face changed. And so one thing I can say is over the last decade, one of the major lessons is that icons and celebrities and the people that we put our hopes and dreams on, they'll fail us. Celebrity culture is dying. You know, it's not about the face. It's not about the people. It's about the issues. And in 2011, I remember everything being about the deficit, and everything being about Obamacare at that time. And then Occupy Wall Street happened. And I think that's when, I think that was another moment, part of the millennial engagement or awakening, where millennials started to get engaged more in culture and they occupied. Obviously, the Occupy Wall Street wasn't as successful, was shut down, or by the time winter came and people got cold, it stopped. But the ideals of that movement changed the conversation. It went from deficits to class warfare to the 1% versus 99%, to basically most of the issues that AOC and Bernie Sanders championed. And so to that point, I think that's probably one of the issues that recharged or gave us a little bit of reboot, like one of our wins. Even though I don't think we don't have a leader, we still don't have anybody in the White House implementing those issues. It feels like majority of the world and our cohort is aware of them and championing them. So
one thing I'm somewhat worried about is if that, like, not to dip back into some Strauss and Howe stuff, but I know that traditionally there tends to be a leader who tends to be a boomer, correct? Who sort of guides, or tends to be a
great
prophet.
champion. Great champion.
Great champion, a prophet, and in this case would be a boomer,
Mm-hmm.
who sort of leads the younger generation in some kind of really big systemic change.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of worried that we don't really have that. You know?
No.
Not be Bernie Sanders.
Huh?
I said, could it not be Bernie Sanders? I mean, he's not a boomer. He's a silent. Well,
here's the trick here with that, because the person isn't necessarily not at the top as far as being the White House during the Revolutionary War. The person they said was their great champion was Ben Franklin.
Right.
So basically, the idea is that this is like a ideological warrior who shows, I guess, who shepherds the younger people to say, hey, this is the ideal. As somebody who has experience, I'm going to sort of show you guys what the pathway is, but you actually have to, do it, not me.
So you guys don't see that there are some more, I do notice, I'm afraid that what if Trump sort of takes that. That mantle. What if some millennials or even Gen Zs are just okay, I guess we're just gonna go with this now, because
maybe that's part of the anomaly. Maybe in a society that's polarized, you get more than one champion. I think Bernie's definitely it. Trump could be it for some, but sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, because to what Abby said, I have noted, I think if you look at the polls, most Gen Z and millennial people, even if they supported Sanders, are planning on voting for Joe Biden. The majority are, but the people who aren't are very loud about it.
Right.
And there are some who are I'm not voting at all. Right. And then there are some who are dude, whatever, let's just burn this thing to the ground. Let's burn this thing to the ground. Let's just vote for Trump. Accelerationism,
Yeah.
And I don't know. I am a little worried. I've noticed with some young, especially white males who are starting to be well, whatever, dude. Let's just go for Trump. He's less establishment than Biden, so let's just do it. So I am worried that maybe there is some of that building, and I don't know if it will become the stronger strain of Gen Z politics, but I do think it's a threat. I do think that's a thing that exists.
Yeah, I hate to use this to say this, I guess, but there is so much privilege behind that. That way of thinking. Okay, we'll just vote for Trump again and burn everything down, because the people that I hear saying that are not what difference does it make, right? When your life is effectively no different now than it was 4 years ago, and when you hear about all of these systematic issues with society, but you don't really face them, then what the hell? Why not? Or maybe the floor has already fallen out from you and you have nowhere further to go, right? But either way, I mean, I agree that it's a sentiment that I hear from a certain group of individuals that I know that don't have anything to lose at the idea of the Supreme Court having 4 people that were picked by Donald Trump, for example.
Who would repeal Roe v. Wade or repeal Roe v. Wade and stuff like that. Repeal
a lot of things.
And marriage equality may be considered another one of those wins. Do you think that that's threatened with 4 more years of Trump? And his.
I mean, I don't know if I would say that is threatened. It could be, but what I do know is that there are things that need to happen that haven't happened yet. Right, we could talk about the Equality Act, which the House has passed, right? And Joe Biden said that he would, if he was elected president, it would be signed into law within the first 100 days of his presidency, which is great. I think that's a piece of legislation that many discriminated groups desperately need in in this country. And I think that something like that, we could say that Trump gets reelected. We elect a Democrat in 2024 that's signed into law, and then the Supreme Court decides it's unconstitutional, right? So it's stuff like that, is that there is more progress that needs to be made, and that will be halted for the next 30 or 40 years at least. And it isn't just the Supreme Court; it's the entire court system. If you don't face, those kind of problems or discrimination, then what difference does it make to you?
Is there any way in which the past 4 years, or you think the coming 4 years, will be worse for you or for someone else?
For me, I've seen a lot of victories within LGBT plus, I guess, rights or just movements in general, and a lot of talk within, the people around me that has been successful. So I think that in the next 4 years, if Trump, were to stay, I'm not sure that would suffer as much.
So you feel it's like, they've made their progress and to the point where it'll be hard to really push back on it, or with Trump in some areas, he seems completely disinterested. In certain areas, like, I'm not going to touch that.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that for my generation, I do think that the social issues have been most of our movements, versus maybe millennials focus more on the economic aspect. We've always been more social, and I just feel like that's something that we're going to continue to fight for, and something that we will continue to be optimistic about. Although there's discouragement, I don't think that some of those social issues deserve that cynicism, I guess.
What about immigration? And gun control, take your pick. Which one? Those are unresolved issues.
Well, I can say with Trump, to go back to, LGBT stuff, just all of this stuff, LGBT, maybe it's going to be hard to repeal gay marriage. I think that's one that, so even a lot of Republicans agree with now, so that's going to be hard to, take step backs on. But I think there's still, discrimination against gay people that is going to be validated by another 4 years of Trump. And then trans people are still going to be horribly discriminated against, and Trump is actively participating in that. And another 4 years of that could be disastrous.
Or at least 4 more years of online debates over bathrooms when we should be talking about immigration and other things.
Yeah, and then you look at immigration. I can talk about how in my community I've seen ICE raids take place and terrorize families. So, and I've seen the terror that causes, and we can't another 4 years of that, and who knows what's going to happen. He's already been separating children from their families. There's been talks of before banning all Muslims. Just the other day, I saw that there are certain Republican senators or lawmakers, I don't know if they were senators, who were talking about banning students coming over from China to study here at our colleges because they could be, trying to get in on our they can't study science at our colleges because they might be trying to get our information. Yeah, that's some terrifying stuff. That's some, this word does get thrown around a lot, but I think that we are under threat of fascism if we have another 4 years of Trump. And I think that we are facing some fascistic policies currently. And then, under Joe Biden and Donald Trump, not much would change economically. I don't think, unfortunately, depending, neither one really differs all that much there. But I think you might get some the courts are really important. Even on economics, I don't think that Biden would put people in the courts who would let businesses get away with whatever they want, like a Trump would. Another 4 years of Trump will just be a fascist corporatist nightmare that I see brewing, and I see escalating.
So is there So is there what hope do you guys have as far as, we're talking about the next 4 years, do you guys see a hopeful future in general?
We talk about, well, most of Gen Z thinks, whatever way, and it tends to be, I think, more progressive in general. Like, there are conservatives, but I think that Gen Z in general is pretty progressive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and I've made this point before to in several different conversations, not on here today, but for all of the faults that there are of the moderate Democrats, the establishment, corporate, whatever you want to call them, people like Joe Biden or Nancy Pelosi, I trust that they're serious about, like, the voting rights and gerrymandering and all of that kind of aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if there are free and fair elections, then eventually, just because, like, most of Gen Z, most of millennials even think a certain way, then progress will be made in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But if there aren't free and fair elections, then what does it matter what people think? Right. So, and I do think that is at stake when we're talking about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. So, it really depends on what happens in November, I guess.
I can say that I'm not super optimistic about what's going to be happening over the next 4 years. Maybe even, I think I'm optimistic about further in the future, that I think through these harder times, I think we have a very good opportunity to get a lot of good from these harder times, because people are waking up to that these systems they're falling apart. They don't work anymore. Now that can lead to us replacing it with a system that's even scarier or worse, which is what could happen if we put in a guy like Trump. Another 4 years. Or we can try and implement a system that actually, a new system that addresses a lot of the things that are falling apart here. But I do think that over the next 4 years, no matter what, you mentioned setting back, if electing Trump would set back Me Too, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that either way, it does kind of seem like, for some communities, electing Biden isn't going to be that huge of a win. What message are we sending, especially the voter cohort that helped us win most in 2018? Were winning over a lot of women, white women who normally would vote Republican, who lived in the suburbs, and they switched over to the Democrats and voted for them. What message are we sending them by electing a guy who has all the Democrats propping up this guy who has all of these allegations against him? And so I think that overall, a lot of us are not too pleased with what our next 4 to maybe 8 years looks like. Most of them are really scared, or most of us are really scared, or have a lot of anxiety. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of us who also still have a lot of, like, okay, things are about to get real, but we're going to be able to maybe get some good out of this. We might be able to convince some people that this is not okay, and we, obviously everything's falling apart, and maybe that's the time where we can get implemented things to actually address these issues that have been neglected.
I was going to cut in and ask, well, I mean, given the time we were in before the events of the last couple of days, of course, the thing we were dealing with was COVID. And of course, the main difference between, say, me and you guys is that you're still in school while all of this is going on. So I guess your views of the immediate future, not to bring it back to that kind of place, but what do you guys see going on, I guess, as you go into the summer and the fall here? Have you heard anything as far as, your school is concerned, or your classmates, or anything about that?
I do want to say, before we go too into it, just mentioning COVID, like, I think that part of what's going to end up defining Gen Z a little bit in the future is kind of like realizing that this kind of big stuff can't happen, and it can't, like, everything is fragile. You can just stop for a couple months, because like I was messaging my 5-year-old cousin and we were like bonding over like oh, I miss my friends, like we're not in school, and I'm like, the fact that we have common ground there, I think, is going to end up shaping the generational boundaries.
Mm-hmm. We have school age kids, like my son is in 3rd grade. I have a 3rd grader and a 1st grader, and they were taken out of school. And so one of the questions, and so they were affected by the lockdown too.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the memes that I continue to see going around is how the lockdown is the Gen Z moment. That's defining you guys. So which probably lump in my kids. Do you feel that you're in the same generation with little kids? Now, don't think age-wise, don't think developmentally, but just can you see the generation going to maybe like 2012?
My brother is 17,
mm-hmm.
16, forgetting his age. And I mean, I know him, I know his friends, I know some people that are a bit younger than him. And I do think that I have more in common with a lot of people that are in high school now than people that are, like 5 years older than me. Mm-hmm. So, if the people that are in high school now, or maybe a little bit younger, are Gen Z, mm-hmm. Then, I guess the like the little kids that are 5, 6, 7 I guess that's also Gen Z. So it's really more of a question of like, if the kind of culture and ideals and whatnot that there are in people that are 5 years younger than me are also going to be reflective of those that are maybe 10 years younger than me or 15 years younger than me.
Beautiful answer. Like, because by the time they're 18, will they still be concerned by the same defining moments? Will they have the moments? Because right now, you guys are still building upon the moments that were plaguing us, which is another reason why we probably look the same. We're still stuck in the mud of what we've been fighting for in the 2000s and 2010s. So maybe by the time they're 18, the 2010 kids are 18, maybe they'll be fighting for another issue that will work you guys in, and we'll know more about what the boundary line is.
Yeah. I can't, when you're talking about kids who are super young, I'm not sure yet, because I'd have to see how they progress,
right.
Whether or not I relate to them. But I can say that already, maybe not like the older kids in high school, but maybe some of the younger kids in high school,
mm-hmm.
they're like on this TikTok stuff, man, and like these fidget spinner stuff. And I'm just like, I don't know, just like culturally wise, I don't know. Like a lot of it does, I don't really connect with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that could just be because they're younger kids being dumb and, whatever. That, I guess that's what it is. I guess that's true with everyone a few years younger than you.
This might be a difference between you and me, because although I don't have a TikTok, I love the fact that it exists. I honestly,
and parents are starting to invade TikTok, by the way, just like the parents invaded Facebook. It's about better. You're about to lose TikTok.
I don't care.
Or not you, but the kids today are about to lose TikTok.
They can have it.
I used to sound like a boomer when I talked about TikTok, and I heard myself talking about it, and I said, you know what? I'm just gonna get one. I'm gonna try and see what all the hype is about. And honestly, I definitely feel like once you have it and you're like, you use it a little bit, like, I know I don't go on it every day or anything, but like, I definitely can see, like, even the younger kids, I'm a little bit like, yeah, okay, we're the same, a little bit, just a little bit, because they're like 7, but
I mean, it's just, I don't know, man. I got it too for a while, and I was just like, maybe it's just because I'm like, maybe I'm weird. I don't know.
You guys don't seem that big on social media in general. That does seem like a core millennial, like the Facebooks and all, and we had MySpace and Facebook, and it does seem like the social media that Gen Z and Alpha or whoever the kids today prefer is totally different than what was popular in the 2010s and 08 around the time.